I've spoken about this a little bit before on this channel, but the United Kingdom has come up a lot in comments and questions to me, and so it's been in my mind as of late, and I am starting to recall a lot of things about living in the United Kingdom when I was very young, for about 3 or 4 years, I think, in the late 80s or early 90s. So, and it was a marvelous time. I have very fond memories of that period. We lived in Surrey, in England, and we lived in Guildford first. When I'm saying we, I'm saying I was a kid, and so my mom and dad and me, because I'm an only child, and so we lived in Guildford in a small house. It was, what was the name of the place? I think it was called Cherry Tree Cottage, and you'd have the milkman delivering milk to the door, which I thought that was a fascinating idea. I'd never really known that, because when we were living in the United States before then, there was no concept of the milkman. So that was very intriguing to me. And the shops would close at 5:30 p.m., which is also very, very interesting. There was the Odeon Cinema in Guildford, and it was a great cinema, and I couldn't go to all the films that I wanted to go because of the rating system in 15 and 18. They didn't have the 12 rating yet. That came later. But they had 15, they had U, PG, 15, and 18. And of course, the 18 films were the ones that I wanted to go see the most, but I couldn't go in because I was too young. But yeah, that was a great time. I've mentioned it before, but when I was there, I first became aware of, let's talking about TV or cinema, it was a very important part of my life when it comes to that sort of thing, and I even now cherish a lot of those memories very closely, and I don't think I'll ever be able to forget them, which is a great thing. There was the Circle K convenience store near where we lived, so we could get rental tapes there. There was also a video rental store near the Odeon Theatre in Guildford. And then later, when we moved to Woking, which is also in Surrey, there was some really great video store nearby. So it was a lot of fun, a really lot of fun. I had such a wonderful experience, and it was great. And in fact, I had a friend from school, and it was such a great coincidence that when we moved to Woking, my friend from school lived on the other side of the fence. And so he could just go through the fence, and we could play, and sometimes we'd have sleepovers, and maybe he'd come over to my house, and maybe we'd invite some other friends, and we'd get a film and we'd watch it together. It would be sometimes a scary film or something, and it would be so great to stay up late at night and watch these genre films, sci-fi films or horror films. I've spoken a little bit about this before, but those were the days. And so how old was I exactly? It must have been maybe... so it would have been, oh gosh, how old was I? 7, 8, 9, something like that. Maybe a little bit older, I forget exactly. But I was in, I went there, yeah, I went there in the middle of my third grade year, I think. So I was there third grade, and then fourth grade, fifth grade, and then sixth grade, if I recall. And then at the end of my sixth grade year, we moved back to the United States. So that would have been, yes, about 4 years. And this was also the time of salmonella scare in England with eggs. I don't know if you recall that. Edwina Currie was in Parliament, and the doctor was Sylvester McCoy. And I remember the first episode I remember seeing on TV was the end of the first episode of Dragonfire, which is a very classic one in the Sylvester McCoy era. And I remember being fascinated by the flavor of Gatorade. Not Gatorade, excuse me, that was in the US. I'm talking about what's the name of that one? Not Gatorade, excuse me. Not Iron Brew. It wasn't Iron Brew, but it was Lucozade. Thank you, Lucozade. Do they still have Lucozade in England now? I'm not sure, but it was that orange stuff in the bottle. That was a one-of-a-kind flavor, and I was hooked on that. That was a really great flavor, and you can't get that anywhere else in the world. That's a real one-of-a-kind flavor. I really miss that flavor of Lucozade. and let's see what else. They had there was the Kinder eggs. Do you remember those the chocolate eggs, which you would get the little toys in them? And this is also around the time of Dime bars and those adverts on TV, Dime bar, and the Nescafe commercials with the romance story. Those were really great too. And there was also Treasure Hunt with what's her name? I want to say it was either Annika Rice or Annabelle Croft. I think it was maybe both of them. So it was Annika Rice first or Annabelle Croft. I forget which one. I forget, but that was great. And then also Top of the Pops too. I always loved Top of the Pops. I was talking about Rocky Horror Picture Show the other day, and I was going to talk about the cover of the song "The Time Warp" by Damien. Do you remember that? Damien's cover of "The Time Warp," and I remember watching that on Top of the Pops. Fascinating. Fascinating. I think you can still watch it on YouTube, and so if you can, take a look. Damien, Top of the Pops, Time Warp. I'm sure it'll come up. That is a great cover. So it was around this time, and also this was around the time of Neighbors. I've mentioned this before, but Neighbors and Home and Away hadn't debuted yet. Actually, it was going to debut. It had debuted when I was still living in England, and so I actually watched the first episode with what were their names? Please forgive me if I forget. There was Ailsa and Alf, and what were the names of the parents? It was Tom and Pippa. Was that right? And I forget. Oh, there was Sally, and Mr. Fisher was there, and Bobby was there. So those were really memorable characters, I understand, but it was a little bit of a different story arc, I think. What was the name of that place? What was the name of the town in Home and Away? I forget. I want to say Anchor Bay because I have Anchor Bay because the Anchor Bay label, but I know it's not Anchor Bay. It's something Summer Bay. Is that right? Is it Summer Bay? I apologize for anyone who is a Home and Away enthusiast. Please don't hold it against me. But I was there at the beginning, and I was a big fan, and I enjoyed watching it after I'd arrive home from school, and I could watch the rerun. That would be later in the afternoon, and also Neighbors too. Neighbors, of course, was on a different channel than Home and Away, at least on the UK broadcasts. So, but still, I think they overlapped the times too, just a little bit. So you couldn't perfectly watch one and watch the other. At least that's what I recall, it's because I think there were a little bit of a rivalry between Neighbors and Home and Away even back then. But Neighbors in the Australian soap Neighbors, this was the time where you had Mrs. Mangle and Harold and Madge. Do I have those names right? Harold and Madge and Mrs. Mangle, and also I was there at the very tail end of the Kylie Minogue, Jason Donovan storyline. So what was her name? Charlene? Was that her name? And this, I've mentioned it before, but this is around the time too that Kylie and Jason released their song. Especially for you, and that was great. My dad too. My dad, I remember, bought Kylie Minogue's album. It was on a record, and so we played that occasionally on the record player. And so that had the songs. What was it? I Should Be So Lucky, and The Locomotion, and what was that song she did? what was that song? I thought it was so fascinating because it had the French title. Well, I still Je ne sais pas pourquoi. So that was that was. I think that was my first. That could have been one of my earliest exposures to the French language, perhaps, unless I had seen some other French films before. I don't think I'd seen. If I did, I don't quite recall. But yeah, but that was very interesting. And we had a lot of great a lot of records there because this was still just around the time that CDs were about to hit the commercial mark, but not quite yet, not quite there yet. I seem to recall. And but also my speaking of the records, in the same room where we had the record player, we had a little stand-up piano, and my mom, when she was alive, she would play the piano all the time. She loved playing the piano, and she was so great. She had Scott Joplin rags down cold. She could play them, and it would be phenomenal. And so I have such fond memories of my mother playing the piano, and in particular Scott Joplin. So whenever I hear Scott Joplin, I smile a little bit extra because it reminds me of when my mother used to play Scott Joplin on the piano. She could play The Entertainer with her eyes closed, and it would just be such a great time. And that's why too she loved The Sting. You know, the film The Sting with Paul Newman and Robert Redford. She loved that film so much, and I think she loved Paul Newman and she loved Robert Redford. But I think, I'm sorry, Paul Newman, and I'm sorry, Robert Redford, but she, as much as she loved them, she loved the music so much of that film. And as you know, it relies on Scott Joplin very much so, to great effect. The one that always gets me is Solace, the Scott Joplin work Solace. And so when my mother would play that on the piano when we were living in England, and of course afterwards, but in particular when we were living in England, she would just be playing. I'd be somewhere in the house, I don't know, as a kid, doing something, watching TV in the kitchen or something, I don't know. And then suddenly I'd just be hearing my mom playing Solace, the song Solace on the piano, and it just would echo throughout the house, and that would be so great. And so now when I hear that, or when I watch The Sting, yeah, that makes me very happy. So, but that also is part of the tapestry of what I remember living in the United Kingdom and in England. So that was marvelous. And I was a kid, and I went to school, and I had some friends there. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to keep in touch with any of my friends that I made in England. So I don't know what people are doing, but I still hold those memories very fondly. And that was a great time. That was a really great time.